Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to draw black fur in pastels. Now for this drawing I did decide to use just my pastel pencils from start to finish, but you can of course use soft pastel sticks or pan pastels for your base if you prefer. Now for my base layer foundation, I want to make sure that I'm getting the placement of the lights and darks as accurate as possible. Now another factor here is soft blending. If I'm working with a base foundation that has harsh edges between the colour changes or the highlights and shadows, then I'm more likely to end up with details that also look harsh as well. So getting something that is blended is something that I do focus all of my tutorials on, because that is a key part of the level of realism that I like to create. Now I've got lots of videos here on YouTube that show different fur colours and fur textures, and all of the base layer foundations do have a blended look to them. So it's something here that I do put a lot of emphasis on. Now once I've got a basic layer of pastel in place, I then still work with refining that base layer. Now here I'm using my lighter and darker pencils to make sure that I'm getting a bit more of the variation in place. I never work with just one solid colour for my base layer. I do try to capture the variations where possible. Now another key part of this, as you can start to see here, is I am indicating at the fur direction. The fur direction is not random, it follows the underlying bone and muscular structure, so it is something that I'm very keen to get right. Now the layering process and how we use our pencils is going to be adjusted depending on the fur colour and the fur texture that we're drawing. But for black fur, I usually typically like to work from dark to light. Now in many cases here I will be working with sometimes a mid-tone and then add in my darker layers on top, but for the very darkest sections of the black fur I will work strictly dark to light. This is of course going to depend on the lighting and so on. And the full tutorial here, which if that is of interest is linked in the description below, covers all aspects of how to adjust the layering process depending on how black that fur looks for each section that we're working on. Now here is a prime example of that on the bridge of the nose. This is where the highlight is at its brightest, so I haven't worked with a dark layer of pastel. I've switched to a lighter colour and then I'm going to darken it up where needed. Now what this enables me to do is ensure that I've got my contrast right from the very beginning. If I've got a highlight in the eye that's particularly bright, such as both of the eyes here, I will use my white first and then I can darken it up later if I need to. But making sure I put my lighter pastel in first just means I know I've got that as bright as it possibly needs to be, and I can easily darken it with that flexibility of pastels. Now once I'm happy with my base layer, this area here needed to be a little bit darker, but once I am happy with that I can then focus more on the next layer of detail. Now this is where I find it's more easy to jump into the brightest highlights too soon, because we've already got pastel established on the paper. It's then easy to forget those midtones. Now for me, capturing the midtones is a big part of drawing realistic black fur. The midtones provide softness and they also help to capture more of that natural shine that this fur will typically have. Now of course the shine on the fur is going to be also affected by the lighting, whether or not that photo is taken indoors or outside, for example. There are different things that are going to affect that. But if there is a shine on the coat, I want to be making sure that I'm working with more of my layering process and breaking it up into each individual layers. So here for example, this grey, it doesn't really look like it's showing up, but it's just enough to be visible. This for me is enough of a reason to stick with this layer before I jump into the next brighter layer. And you'll see many times in this drawing where some of those layers don't have a huge impact, but I still stick with that. If I am to miss out these layers, then my highlights are actually going to look quite harsh because they don't have that softness I've mentioned in previously. Now because this was a larger drawing, it's 12 by 16, so it's not massive, but the dog was able to fill pretty much most of that paper. It's enabling me to capture an extra level of realism that's a bit trickier to do on a smaller size. Now to get these fine details, the pencil technique and how we're using the pencil is crucial. This is something that I cover thoroughly in the real-time version of this tutorial. Now because I create my real-time lessons with a voiceover while I'm drawing, everything is explained in the moment. So if I change how I'm holding the pencil, how much pressure I'm using, for example, everything here is mentioned. Now, the slightest alteration to how we're using the pencil can have a very big impact to the level of realism, the finer look to that detail that I'm aiming for. So I want to be making sure that I'm incorporating everything here, the fur direction, the fur length, the fur thickness, whether or not we need to be working with more of a blunt point, a sharper point. Everything here does come into more of a consideration when we are aiming for that next level of realism. Now, I've briefly mentioned the importance of fur direction and why it's so crucial to get that accurate. But on the bridge of the nose, I feel that this is one of those areas where it's more likely to go wrong. Now, part of the reason for that is going to be the way that the photo has been taken. So a completely side view is not going to show as much of the changes of fur direction on the bridge of the nose because there are areas of the nose that you can't see. Whereas here, for example, where it's not quite side on but it's not face on either, that change of direction is going to be shifted, and it's really something here that we want to be paying attention to. Now, if, for example, I'm working on these details here and I make my pencil strokes too vertical, they go directly up towards the middle of the paper on the top edge. That's going to then make this section of the bridge of the nose appear narrower. Now, on the other side of that, if I then make my pencil strokes too curved and they droop too much down towards the lower edge, then I can actually make the face look too wide. So this is here something where a little minor alteration in the pencil technique and how we're curving those pencil strokes is going to have a big impact to the shape and form of the animal that we're drawing. Now, one quick thing here that I want to mention is this section where I'm working on just darkening this transition from the highlight. This is an area that I find can sometimes be skipped or rushed over. Now, the reason I'm taking the time here to soften this into the highlight is because this will help to make the fur look like it gradually starts rather than having a harsh start and stop point. Now, if the fur transition here isn't soft enough, it can make it look like the top of the nose isn't attached at all, which obviously is a real problem. So getting that level of softness at the right point here is important. Now, moving on to the next layers of detail, and this is where I want to start to enhance more of my values and build up the next layer of highlights. Now again, at this stage here, I'm not focusing on my brightest highlights first, I'm still looking to increase those in stages. Now, when I'm working with drawing the black fur, it's not necessarily always about using grey pencils, a black and a white. There are times where I'm going to be using some additional colours, maybe blues and purples, and in some cases greens, depending on the colours that are being reflected into the fur. Now, this pencil here, for example, it is classed as a grey, but it does have a bluer, cooler tint. In a moment, you'll see two pencils side by side, and what I'm doing here is just demonstrating in the real-time tutorial the difference between those cooler and warmer shades. Now, this is something that I do like to focus all of my real-time tutorials on because it's one of the questions that I'm asked more frequently. What pencils do we use in terms of picking the exact colour based on what we can see in our reference photo? So when I'm working with a colour-based medium, acrylics or pastels, I do want to be making sure that I'm not stressing about the exact colour because there are many different pencils or paints that I could be using, but that I'm noticing whether or not it is a warm or cool colour. Now, being able to isolate those two things makes the colour selection process much easier. If knowing what pencils to use is something that you do find quite challenging, then it is something, as I say, that I do cover in my step-by-step lessons. If they are of interest, I'll link that information to those in the description below. Now, as always, if you do have any art-related questions or questions relating to my step-by-step tutorials, then feel free to pop any questions in the comments below. Now, at this stage in the layering process, I am now using more of my lighter pencils, but what I'm doing here is adjusting my pressure yet again so that I can create a variation of values with one pencil. Now, what I mean by that is, this is the Carbothello 110. You can see from how light the lead is that it could go significantly brighter if I wanted to. But by easing off of the pressure and using light pressure throughout, I can create something that doesn't look as bright, and then I can increase the pressure to make those details lighter in stages. Now, the amount of pressure to apply to the pencil, it does come more with the experience and confidence of using pastel pencils. But one big tip for maintaining light pressure is holding it a little bit further away from the lead. Now for the most part here, I am usually about 1 inch or 1.5 inches away from the tip of the pencil. This helps to make sure that I can't actually physically force more pressure down that pencil, which will end up in a shorter and thicker line. Now if I am holding that pencil a little bit closer to the lead, it's because I'm increasing the angle on the pencil so that I'm trying to create a thin but very, very short pencil stroke. Now when I work with progressing to my next layer of details, you can see that I've sharpened my pencil. Now at what point to sharpen the pencil is again going to depend on the size of the artwork and the level of finesse to those details. The finer the detail needs to be, and typically that happens when we work larger, usually the pencil needs to be a little bit sharper. Now there is no set rules in art, and with pastel pencils you can still create fine details with a blunter tip. But certainly if you are aiming for something that is very, very thin in that level of realism and how fine those details are, working with a little bit more of a sharper point can make that easier. Now the next stage of the layering process is to then come in with my white. Now here again, same thing that I mentioned with the Carbothello 110 is adjusting the pressure. This pencil has the potential to be significantly lighter, so again I'm using all of the same pencil techniques in terms of light pressure and then increasing that where needed. Now one of the wonderful things about working with pastels is the flexibility that we can switch between dark and light layers. So if I feel like I maybe have added too many highlights or I need to adjust the colour, I can come back in with something that's more vibrant such as the blue or a darker layer just to really refine that layer of detail that I've added. Here's a great example that if I then want to add some more of my top lighter details, I can do that. Pastels is such an incredibly versatile and forgiving medium, especially if you're using the right paper. The paper is crucial and my paper of choice is Pastelmat. This level of realism does require having a surface that allows for lots of many layers to build up the depth, which is something of course that I focused on throughout this video. So I do hope this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you would like to draw along to the real-time tutorial of this Black Labrador, then all of the information to that is listed in the description below. If you do have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video at the end of the week. But as always, thank you so much for watching.